It didn't make the newspapers, and it wasn't the subject of an Oprah show or more. But in case you didn't notice it either, my world started to blow up on the 10th of February last year. On that day, as Saturday, I picked up the mail and took it home. We live in a rural community where all mail is picked up at the post office. When I got home, I sat on my desk, opened the bills, wrote checks, and balanced our checkbook. Usually Julia, my wife, does this chore. She says it makes her feel rich. Julia was at her sister's for their monthly 3-day visit, so I decided to take care of the bills myself. The Visa bill seemed a bit high, so I scanned the charges to see if I had forgotten anything we bought. The only charge that seemed strange was for a hotel room in the city where Julia's sister lives. Her sister and her husband reside in a big 4-bedroom house in Salinas, California. They have no kids, and one of the bedrooms is set up as a guest room. It just didn't make sense that Julia would need to stay in a hotel. I looked back through previous bills and saw that every other month for a year, this same room charge had appeared. I called the hotel. I explained that I noticed the charge on my bill and needed to verify some information. Their records showed a reservation under my name for room 1228, checking in at 8:45 p.m. and checking out automatically the next afternoon. I thanked them and hung up. Why would Julia stay in a hotel? Why would she register under my name? Why wouldn't she mention spending nearly $200 to stay in a hotel? A total of over $1,000 for the year. And why a nice hotel when a cheaper place would have sufficed if she was just visiting her sister? I went to dinner at our neighborhood sports bar and grill. I know there was a game on the big screen, but I couldn't tell you who was playing or who won. I left at 9 o'clock and called Moran's house. Moran is Julia's sister. When she answered, I asked to speak to Julia. She's in the bathroom, Moran said. She'll call you back in a few minutes. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID said it was Julia's cell phone. Me? Sorry, I was in the bathroom when you called. How are things? Pretty good. I just wanted to call and see how things are with you and Moran. Things are great. We're going shopping tomorrow. Well, don't spend us into the poorhouse. Really, I just wanted to hear your voice. I miss you. Oh, you're sweet. I miss you too. Sleep well. I'll see you Sunday night. You too. Good night. I love you. Right back at you. The call didn't feel right. Why would she call me back on her cell phone? Roaming minutes are expensive. Something was up. I called my boss at home and explained I had a family emergency. I promised to do my best to be back for work on Monday, but made no guarantees. He said if I wasn't there, he'd put me on personal leave for a couple of days and then on vacation. I promised to at least call them Monday. Half an hour later, I was on the road to Salinas. As I drove, I thought about what might be going on. Either there weren't many possibilities, or I wasn't willing to admit them to myself. The only scenario I could think of was that she was seeing someone at the hotel. That would explain the new clothes she bought in Salinas. That would explain the return call on her cell. That would explain why she wasn't at Moran's house. The rest of the trip, I was lost in my thoughts. What if she was having an affair? What would I do? What if she'd been seeing someone for a year? Could I forgive that? What if it wasn't just one guy but several? Could I live with that level of betrayal? 4.5 hours later, I was in Salinas. I drove to the hotel where she had stayed over the past year on a regular basis. I found her car in the parking lot. Since I carry a spare key for her car and she carries one for mine, I opened her car and took a look around. I found nothing incriminating. Remembering a truck stopped not far from the hotel. I went there and bought a blanket, some snacks, and an alarm clock. Back at the hotel, I parked where I could see the hotel doors in her car. I always carry binoculars in my car, which allow me to stay out of sight while keeping watch. I got comfortable and set the alarm for 5:30. At 5:30, the alarm went off. I opened the car windows to let the cold air wake me up and clear the condensation from the glass. I ate some of the snacks I bought the night before and wished for coffee. For over an hour, I watched the front doors of the hotel. Finally, I saw Julia walk out, but she wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back. He carried 2 bags, one of which was Julia's usual travel bag. He walked into her car, put her bag in the trunk, and they stood talking for a moment. Then they embraced. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. It wasn't a friendly farewell. It was intimate. I didn't confront them. Instead, I sat frozen, my mind racing. My wife was meeting this man in a hotel, and it wasn't the first time. Julia got in her car and drove off. The man returned to a sleek black Mercedes. I noted the license plate number and followed him. He drove to an office building with a sign that read Carl Tinker Realty. This photo was painted on the window. Now I had a name to match the face. I wrote down the business's phone number and drove to Morin's house. As I arrived, I saw Mike Morin's husband pulling out of the driveway. I followed him to the print shop he owned and watched him unlock the door. I parked and walked inside. When he saw me, the color drained from his face. "Mike, I need to talk to you. I don't know what I can tell you. Start with where my wife was last night. She was with us until after dinner. Then she said she wanted to go for a drive to think. She was gone all night, and she just goes for drives to think. How often has this happened before?" Mike looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "Mike, you know where she was. You've known for over a year. You've helped her keep this secret from me. What can I say? Maybe a phone call tipping me off would have helped." "I didn't know for sure," Mike stammered. "Would you want me to call if your wife came to visit and then disappeared for a night?" "Yeah, I would." "And now, Mike, you have one chance to make this right. Keep quiet about this. Don't tell anyone we spoke. Stay out of it entirely, or you'll be part of what's coming. Understand?" Mike nodded nervously. "Now tell me what you know about Carl Tinker." "He's arrogant, owns a fair-sized realty company, and acts like the world owes him something. I did a few jobs for him a while back, but he took forever to pay, so now I only work for him if he pays up front." "Is he married?" "Yes. Trophy wife and 2 kids. I need her name and phone number." "Send it to me." "Okay," Mike muttered. I turned and walked out. A few minutes later, I was driving past Morin's house when I saw both women getting into Morin's car. I followed them and was surprised when they stopped at a Planned Parenthood building. They stayed inside for almost an hour, and when they came out, Julia was crying. The drive home was a blur of thoughts, and now Julia might be pregnant. Or worse, maybe she just found out she had a serious health issue. Either way, the situation was spiraling out of control. As I thought through the possibilities, my mind kept returning to one question. What if this wasn't just one man? What if Carl wasn't the only one? By the time I got home, I had the beginnings of a plan. I spent the rest of the day planning and reaching out to people I trusted. A friend came over and installed a phone monitor on our home line. It would record all outgoing and incoming calls. I also hired a private investigator to gather evidence locally, just in case there was more happening closer to home than I realized. I made a stop at our doctor's office to request a full checkup and some tests. I asked for discretion until the results came back. By 8 p.m. on Sunday, I heard the garage door open. Julia was home. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, pretending to take some pills. "Pete, are you okay?" she asked. "I don't feel great," I said. "Might be the flu. A few people at work have it. Maybe you should go to bed and see if a good night's sleep helps," she said. "Maybe I should sleep in the guest room so I don't risk catching it." "I'll miss you, but I think that's a good idea," I replied. She went to the guest room and got it ready. I stayed in the kitchen, letting my thoughts churn. Sleeping without her wasn't pleasant, but given what I suspected, I couldn't see myself being comfortable near her right now. I eventually fell asleep and had a vivid dream where I stood trial for seeking justice against those who had betrayed me. The next morning, After Julia left for work, I checked the phone monitor. She'd made 3 calls before going to bed. The first was to Moran. Julia asked her to schedule an appointment for Saturday morning at a clinic. She told Moran to cover for her by saying they were attending a baby shower, just in case I asked. The second call was to someone named Paul, whom she addressed as a lawyer. Their conversation was businesslike, but one line stuck with me. She said she had to undergo a procedure and would be unavailable for a couple of weeks. It was clear she was making plans to hide something. The third call was to a friend, Donna, who lived nearby. Julia asked her to check in on me, saying she was worried I might be suspicious or might need someone to keep an eye on me while she was out. Donna sounded hesitant and even asked Julia when she planned to stop whatever she was doing. Julia replied, "Soon, Donna. Soon." I called my boss and let him know I wouldn't be in until Tuesday. I also called the private investigator to inform him about a meeting Julia had scheduled for Monday. He asked if I wanted photos or video, and I told him both. Later, I went back to bed, but I realized I had put on boxers instead of my usual sleepwear. It struck me that I must have done it subconsciously because I knew someone might come over. I took them off and climbed back into bed. Sometime later, I heard the door open. Donna had come over carrying chicken soup. "Donna, what are you doing here?" I asked. "Julia asked me to bring you some chicken soup," she said. "You need fluids, and soup is good for whatever ails you." "Thanks, but I really need to use the bathroom. Can you give me a minute?" I thought she had stepped out into the hallway, but as I headed for the bathroom, she was still in the room. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. When I returned, the soup was waiting for me on the nightstand. I ate it. It was homemade, not store-bought. Donna returned a little while later. "Good, you ate it all?" she asked. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I said. "No fever or cough though, so I guess I'm lucky." "Yes, you are," she replied. "I'll call Julia and let her know you're doing okay." She left shortly after, and I stayed in bed. When Julia came home, she brought me more of the chicken soup Donna had made. She told me about her day and mentioned that Moran had invited her to a baby shower for a friend. She offered to stay home to take care of me, but I told her she should go if I wasn't still sick by Friday. Later that evening, I heard her making a call to Moran, but I didn't bother to listen in. I already had a recording. On Monday morning, I told Julia I felt well enough to go to work. After she left, I called my supervisor and explained that I was dealing with some personal issues and needed the day off. He agreed. By 11 a.m., I was parked in a spot where I could see Julia's car, ready to follow her when she left for lunch. I didn't have to wait long. She came out of the building with 2 other women, who got into their cars and waved as they drove away. Julia got into her car and drove 6 blocks to the Marriott Suites. She parked near the back and approached an exit door. A tall blond man opened the door for her from inside, and she slipped in. About an hour later, the door opened again, and they walked out together. The man was well dressed, with the demeanor of someone accustomed to authority. He escorted her to her car, gave her a quick peck on the cheek, opened the door for her, and waited until she drove off before heading to his Lexus. I noted his license plate number. After Julia returned to work and parked her car, I drove off to meet my private investigator. I needed to know who this Paul was and confirm my suspicions. The investigator told me he already had some videos and photos ready to review. I also hired another private investigator in Salinas to dig into Carl Tinker. He offered me a discount, saying he'd find satisfaction in exposing someone like that. I informed him about Julia's meeting scheduled for Friday night in room 1228 and asked for both photos and videos. To add another layer to my plan, I ordered flowers to be delivered to Julia's office on Thursday. The card would read, "For being such a wonderful wife, your husband Pete." I wanted her to start reflecting on what could happen if her loving husband found out the truth. Later, I left her a voicemail. "I'll be a bit late tonight due to work. I'm out in the field, but we'll be home by 7. Pete, when I arrived home at 7, her car's hood was still warm. She hadn't been home long. Julia met me in the kitchen, wearing a long flannel nightgown. I remembered joking about it once, calling it Wyoming Coocher, and we both laughed back then. "Feeling any better?" she asked. "Somewhat. Still really tired," I replied. She offered me some chicken soup with matzo balls she had picked up from a deli. After dinner, I told her I was heading to bed early, feeling drained. Later that night, I turned on the phone monitor on my computer and reviewed the day's recordings. In one conversation, Julia asked Morin to schedule another meeting with Carl for Friday night and mention an appointment at the clinic on Saturday. The next day, I went to work but received a text from Julia around midday. "You sent me flowers." "Yes." "Is that wrong?" "Are you upset?" "No, it's so sweet. You've never done that before." "Thank you." I explained that I'd heard advice on the radio about sending flowers to your wife and realized I should do it because I loved her more than words could express. That evening, she invited me to dinner. She stayed close to me the entire evening, being affectionate and attentive. I made casual remarks intended to make her reflect on her actions. At one point, we noticed a couple in the restaurant who couldn't seem to keep their hands off each other. "Do you think they're married to each other?" I asked, flustered. "Of course, it's probably their anniversary." At home, she tried to get closer to me, but I told her I was too tired. On Friday morning, I kissed her goodbye and headed to work. By 6 p.m., I was parked in Salinas, watching as Morin dropped Julia off near a hotel. Julia wore a sleek blue dress and heels I'd never seen before. Carl was already waiting for her at the entrance. He embraced her, placed his hand on her waist, and escorted her inside. I spent the night in my car, dozing off occasionally. At 6:40 the next morning, Carl exited the hotel, retrieved his Mercedes from valet parking, and drove off. About half an hour later, Julia walked out pale but composed. Morin picked her up, and they drove to the clinic together. When they came out over an hour later, I was parked near Morin's car, positioned so they would approach without seeing me first. Morin was supporting Julia, who looked weak. I stepped out and stood directly in front of them, blocking their path. "Oh," Morin said, stunned when she saw me. Julia looked up at me and burst into tears, repeating over and over, I'm sorry. I got her into my car and told Morin to go home. The drive back took over 4 hours, and the car was filled mostly with silence, broken only by her crying. I didn't speak for most of the trip, and she cried for most of it. Halfway home, I stopped at a rest area and helped her to the restroom. When she hadn't come out after 10 minutes, I called out, announcing that I was coming in to get her, and did just that. She was sitting there, tears streaming down her face. With some encouragement, she got up, and I helped her back to the car. Just before we got home, I finally spoke. "I know you'll need time before you can talk about this, but tomorrow you will tell me everything about the pregnancy, the decision to end it, and the life you've been hiding from me. There are consequences for your actions. The trust we had is gone." Once we were home, I helped her to our bedroom. I laid a towel on the bed, helped her change, and tucked her in, turning off the light. I left the room, closing the door quietly behind me. In the kitchen, I called Donna. "Donna, have you ever taken care of a woman after she's had a procedure?" "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Would you come over and help? Julia had one this morning. I don't know anything about what care she might need. Is she in pain? Is there heavy bleeding?" She hasn't said much, and I didn't notice anything when I helped her to bed. "Okay, I'll be there around 9 if that's all right." "That's fine. Thank you." Donna arrived promptly. I walked her to the bedroom and left them alone. I stayed in my office but turned on the intercom so I could listen without being seen. Donna gently walked into Julia. "How are you feeling?" "I want to die," Julia whispered. He was waiting for us outside the clinic. He put me in a car and drove us home. He didn't yell, swear, or say anything cruel, but he knows about everything. When we got home, he told me I had to explain everything tomorrow. What will you tell him? I don't know. I don't even know how much he already knows. Does he know about Carl? About Paul? He wants the truth. But if I tell him everything, he'll throw me out. Donna tried to keep her focused. How are you physically? I heard the sound of the covers wrestling. Donna continued. How long has it been since you changed? Still the one from the clinic, Juliet admitted. Not much discharge or blood, so I guess I'm lucky. That's a good sign, Donna reassured her. Then Julia asked hesitantly, if Pete throws me out, can I stay with you for a few days? Yes, for a few days, Donna replied firmly. But I'm not in the market for a roommate. I understand, Julia said softly. God, Donna, I've really messed everything up. Haven't I? Yes, Donna said plainly. And for what? It was exciting, Julia admitted, her voice breaking. I don't even care about Carl or Paul. Paul threatened me. He's a lawyer. And Maureen, she's my sister. She's been part of my life forever. It was all so stupid. I should have just told Pete a year ago. Well, Donna said, call me after you talk to him. I turned off the intercom and waited. A little while later, Donna came into my office. She needs rest, but she's doing well physically. She could probably go back to work on Monday. And emotionally. She's fragile. Something must have snapped for her to get pregnant, then change her mind and end it so quickly. I am so deep, but this isn't easy for anyone. I just don't understand why she did any of this. I know I couldn't give her a child, but I didn't think that would drive her to this. Donna placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You love her, don't you? Of course I do, I said. I just need to understand why she made these choices. I hope someday someone loves me as much as you love Julia, she said quietly before leaving. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, I peeked into the bedroom. Need help getting to the bathroom? I asked. No, she replied. I went a few minutes ago. Hungry? Coffee? Juice? Whiskey? She gave me a faint smile. I am hungry, but don't bother making anything for me. One Pete omelette coming right up, I said, heading to the kitchen. I made her favorite omelette and coffee, brought it back on a tray, and helped her sit up in bed. I fed her each bite, cutting her off every time she tried to speak. When the food was gone, I left her with the coffee and returned to the kitchen to clean up. Afterward, I sat down in the chair by the bed. I'm ready to listen now, I said. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. Who went and most importantly, why? Julia looked down at her hands. You already know some of it. I didn't want you to find out at all. Pretend I know nothing, I said firmly. Start as far back as when we got married. There have only been 2 minutes since we got married, she said hesitantly. Paul and Carl. Carl lives in Salinas. Paul is here in town. Paul was first. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I accidentally hit his car in a parking lot and didn't want to go through insurance. The damage was $3,600, and I didn't have that kind of money without you noticing. He proposed a deal. 3 encounters in exchange for him covering the repair himself. I stayed silent, letting her continue. I thought about it for a week. He called threatening to report the accident if I didn't decide. So I agreed. When was the first time you met with him? January 2007. And how often after that? Once a week. I stared at her for a moment. That's a lot more than 3 times. Where is the $8,400 he paid you? She flinched. What? The original agreement was 3 times for $3,600. After that, you kept meeting him. Where is the $8,400 he paid you? I asked. He never paid me, Julia replied hesitantly. I frowned. But the original agreement was 3 meetings for $3,600. That's $1,200 each. If you've been meeting him once a week for over a year, that's at least 60 times. Logically, he would owe you $72,000 minus the $3,600. That's $68,400. Did he threaten you? Julia nodded, looking down. He said he could have me arrested for insurance fraud. He told me I had no choice but to continue or risk jail. I took a deep breath to stay calm. Oak, I'll look into that later. Please go on. She shifted uncomfortably. I met Carl when I was visiting my sister about a year ago. We were at a club, and I'd had too much to drink. Things got out of hand, and I woke up in a back room, realizing what had happened. She paused, her voice breaking. He took some photos that night, and he's been using them to blackmail me. He calls and demands I see him whenever I visit my sister. I try to keep my voice steady. Let me guess, he threatens to send me the pictures. Julia nodded again. I clenched my jaw. Don't worry, I'll look into him as well. Right now, you're what matters. Did you want to have a baby? I asked gently. No, she whispered. Paul and Carl weren't careful a few times, and when I missed my period, I knew what had happened. I wish I had told you as soon as I found out. I went through it all alone, and it hurts to know I shut you out. I paused, letting her gather herself. Please continue, I said softly. Paul and Carl were the only men I've been with since we got married, she said. And how many women? I asked. Julia hesitated. None. She finally said, but when I was younger, my sister and I shared a room. Growing up, we were close, and we experimented. It was harmless. Both prefer men. Does Mike know about you too? No, she admitted. I sighed. Is that everyone? Yes. Can you ever forgive me? Julia asked, her voice breaking. Forgiveness isn't the issue, I said. We'll need to deal with Paul and Carl so they leave you alone. As for you and your sister, that's not something I want to interfere with. But some changes will need to happen. Let's start right now. I stood, grabbed the cordless phone, and handed it to her. Call your sister. Tell her you need your car before Monday morning. Ask her and Mike to drive it down, and I'll give them gas money for the trip. Julia looked shocked. She'll ask why. What should I say? Tell her I've forgiven you both, I replied calmly. Her eyes widened in astonishment. I'll start making lunch, I said. Anything you'd like. Anything, she asked, her voice trembling. Anything. Oh, Pete, she whispered. I love you. Call her, I said, leaving the room. In the kitchen, I took a moment to reflect. I realized she had believed every word I'd said about forgiveness. But in truth, I didn't fully trust her anymore. I barely felt like I knew her. My phone beeped. A call from the private investigator I'd hired. I have over 100 photos and an hour of video for you, the PI said. Do you want me to mail them to you? I have a better idea, I replied. Mail a copy to me, but also prepare a package with all the evidence and deliver it to an address. Julia's sister and her husband are driving down today and can bring it to me. God, the PI said, I'll also send a copy to Carl's wife. I nodded to myself. Do that. I called the number for Carl's wife. Hello, she answered. Is Carl home? No, he's working. Saturdays are busy in realty. Are you sure about that? Your husband has been having an affair with my wife for over a year. This week you receive a package in the mail with proof. Last Friday was Carl home? No, he admitted. He said he was in Fresno for work. While he was working, all right, just not in Fresno, I said coldly. He was with my wife in Salinas. She ended the pregnancy on Saturday morning. You'll get a DVD and some photos. Whether you show them to him or not is up to you. Her voice trembled. What do you want from me? I want $100,000 in cash by the end of the week. Or what? She asked. Think about the possibilities, I replied. Is there a number where I can call you after I've seen the evidence? I can give you an email address, I said. and I did. Next, I called the local PI to follow up. "Have you looked at the video?" I asked. "I have," he confirmed. "The audio is just as incriminating as the footage. It clearly shows Julia was being blackmailed." "Do you know much about the lawyer in question?" I pressed. "He specializes in criminal law and has a reputation for getting some unsavory characters back on the streets. He's been a partner in his firm for just over a year, married to a minister's daughter, and has 2 kids in college." I took down the senior partner's private number and also got contact details for Paul's wife. The phone at Paul's home rang 5 times before a woman answered. "May I speak to Mrs. Dom?" I asked. "This is she," the woman said. "How interested would you be in evidence that your husband has been involved with a married woman?" "Very interested. Do you know someone who has such evidence?" "Eid al. Are you aware that his law firm has a suite at the Married Suites here in town?" "Yes," she said cautiously. "Are you aware that he has been meeting someone there every Wednesday afternoon for almost a year?" "No." "What proof do you have of this?" "I have a video taken this past Monday." "How do I get the video?" "You buy it," I said. "I'm accepting bids from 3 parties. Payment will be transferred to a bank account. I'll provide it if your bid wins." "Who else is bidding?" "The senior partner of his firm and the county district attorney." "When is the deadline?" 10 a.m. on Monday. "Give me the number to call to place my bid," she demanded. I gave her the number for a burner phone I had bought specifically for this purpose. It was untraceable. I also provided specific times when she could call. When the call ended, I immediately contacted the senior partner. The senior partner answered on the first ring. The conversation went as expected. He wasn't interested in purchasing the video, regardless of its contents. He hung up without hesitation. I spent half an hour inside checking on Julia, ensuring she was okay, then went back outside to make another call. This time to the district attorney's office. I asked some general questions about handling and selling evidence, carefully avoiding specifics at first. Toward the end of the call, the person on the other end asked, "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "A video of a lawyer involved with my wife at a hotel." "Is either person prominent?" "The lawyer is somewhat known for his work defending high-profile criminal cases, and you want to sell the video?" "Yes." "If I sell it to someone and inform you where to retrieve it, could you obtain it without needing to buy it directly?" There was a pause. "We cannot purchase evidence ourselves, but if you sell it to someone else and provide details, we can consider using it. I just need assurance I won't end up in trouble for having, selling, or disclosing this evidence," I clarified. The person provided some general guidance and left me with a number to call for further verification. By 11 a.m. on Sunday, Julia's car was back in our garage. Maureen and Mike were sitting with us in the living room. I could tell Maureen was relieved, thinking I had forgiven Julia for everything with Paul and Carl. The deeper issues, like the history between Maureen and Julia, hadn't come up yet. On my desk was the package I had prepared. I turned to Mike and said, "Mike, your wife and mine have been keeping a secret from us. There's something they didn't tell us, something every husband would want to know before getting married. Do you want to know what it is?" Mike glanced at Maureen, confused but intrigued. "Yes," he said. "Maureen," I said, "you've kept this secret longer than we've been married. Care to explain?" Maureen looked flustered. "I don't know what you're talking about." Maureen said, looking at Julia. "They seem to be partners in some kind of plan." Mike looked at Maureen like she had suddenly done something terrible. "No, I love being with you. I've been with Walt just once. Jesus, save me from this mess." "You and Julia, you're both," he said. She stood up abruptly, and both Maureen and Julia flinched. He paced around the living room like a trapped animal, restless and agitated. Finally, he bolted, rushing out the door. Before Maureen could stop him, he was in his car and gone. Maureen stood in the front yard and cried for a long time. Julia went to her side, and they stood together, supporting each other. I watched through the window and a small smile crept onto my face as they turned towards the house. But as soon as they did, my expression turned serious. And sure, I'll come back when he calms down. It was a shock to him. I knew he wouldn't like it, but that was too much. What if he doesn't come back? It's too soon to think like that. I'll be back. I went into the kitchen and made some iced tea. They sat together on the couch, holding hands. I sat in a chair near them. Remember, Julia, I said I told you some things would have to change. This is one of those things. You two can only stay together under these conditions, if he's with you, or somewhere else if I am with you. Moran looked at me. Wait, you want me to? This isn't a discussion. You could both go out, get in Julia's car, and drive to Selena's place to see if Mike will let you both stay there. You can agree to my conditions or not. When Mike comes back, Moran can go back to Selena's and live with Mike, and you can stay here with me. I won't stay with you unless and until you, Julia, and Mike all agree on the conditions. Mike will never agree to this. He'd divorce me before he would ever say it's okay. In that case, when he files for divorce, he will have given permission for you to do whatever you want. I don't want a divorce. Are you speaking for both of you, Julia? You have a voice here too. Are you willing to live by our new agreement, or do you need help loading your car? I have to choose between being married to you and living by these rules, or not being married to you. Yes, and if you choose not being married to me, I want you out. You must leave the house. Since you just had a procedure, I understand that moving would be difficult. I'll give you until the end of the month to move out. The sisters exchanged a long, silent look. It was clear that no matter what they chose, something important would be lost. I stood up and went for a walk. They'll be back in half an hour. You will each give me your answers when I return. If you're both gone when I get back, that means you don't want to stay married to me, and he'll file for divorce on Monday. Neither of them said anything. I quietly closed the door and walked south. Half an hour later, I returned. I walked slowly to the door, noticing Julia's car in the garage. They hadn't left. I opened the front door. They were still sitting on the couch, a box of tissues between them. A small trash can was sighted, half full of used tissues. They looked up as I entered. Julia spoke first. We accept. Mike called and told Moran he's filing for divorce on Monday. He gave her until the end of the month to get her things from his house. Mike is tough, I replied. Did he say anything else? He said we would both rot in hell for what we've been doing, Moran said, wiping away more tears. I didn't know Mike was so religious. I never knew him to go to church. Well, just so you know, you kept a secret from your husbands. If we had known from the beginning, we wouldn't have found ourselves in this situation on top of everything else. I wouldn't have been upset about it, as long as I was included. Mike never would have agreed to it. Knowing what you know now, that he would divorce you when he found out, would you have married him anyway? I love him more, I replied. It's hard to hide things from both of you for all these years. I think I would have married him anyway. To practical matters. I'm hungry and you both need to eat. Let me order some Chinese food delivered so we don't have to cook anything. Is there something you'd like in particular, or should I choose? You choose, Julia said. The order was placed, and I joined them again in the living room. Can you both wear the same clothes mostly? I asked. My shoes are bigger, Julia said, but everything else fits fine. Moran will need clean clothes until we can get to Selena's and get her things. You can have the guest room from now on. Julia and I will share the master bedroom. At 10, I left my computer and went to bed. As I settled in for the night, Julia whispered, "Thank you for forgiving me. I love you. Sleep well." I faced away from her and fell asleep. Each morning I left for work early. Moran got a transfer within her company, which would start in 2 weeks, so she would be on vacation until her new role began. She rented a van, drove to Selena's, and got her things. By Thursday evening, she was fully moved in. Julia was doing everything she could think of to get my attention, but I resisted for many reasons. The reason I gave her was that I was still concerned about her health. She had just gone through a procedure, and I didn't want to do anything that might hurt her if she wasn't fully healed. Thursday evening, we stayed home and watched TV. There was a knock at the front door. I answered it, and a man said, "Is Maureen Connor here?" Maureen heard her name and came to the door. "I'm Maureen Connor," she said. The man handed her an envelope and said, "You've been served," before turning and walking away. We opened the envelope and inside were the divorce papers. Mike had filed for divorce on Monday, just as he said he would. Maureen and Julia were quiet for the rest of the evening. They both seemed to think I would continue taking care of them. The next morning, Maureen made a good breakfast for us. During breakfast, my phone rang. It was Paul's wife. She told me that she had asked Paul about something, and he had told her that Julia had pressured him into certain actions. She didn't want to see the video or deal with it further. "For all I care, you can show it in a theater," she said before hanging up. An hour later, I Googled Paul Dom and found out he was being honored by the Los Angeles Trial Lawyers Association at a convention at the Bonaventure Hotel. I remembered what his wife had said, so I thought, why not make a statement? I contacted a private investigator to get a copy of the video, and after watching it, I realized the situation was more serious than I had initially thought. I contacted the FBI and discussed my plan with an agent who was intrigued by the idea. We made an appointment to hand over the video evidence. I also made arrangements to rent a room at the hotel where the convention was being held. I reserved the room under an alias, Carl Tinker, and made all the necessary preparations for the screening. On the day of the convention, I arrived at the hotel, paid in cash for the room, and rented the necessary equipment. The setup was ready, and when the lawyers began filing in, one of them asked where Paul was. I don't even know Paul personally. I was just here to show the video. At 11 o'clock, I pressed the button on the remote in my pocket, and the video began playing. The room, filled with 15 people, watched as Paul and Julia walked into a hotel room where Paul made certain statements. The room was tense. Paul, in a hurry, said, "I only have 90 minutes before I need to get back to court. Get ready." He started preparing for what was to come. The lawyers in the room watched attentively as Paul spoke to Julia and observed his treatment of her closely. 3 of the men left the room and returned a few minutes later with several more people. By the time the DVD finished, there were 30 people in the room. As it ended, I overheard one man say, "He's done for. The association will kick him out." A woman with him added, "I wonder which lawyer will take his wife's case now." 10 minutes later, 40 more people entered, and I restarted the DVD. About 15 minutes later, Paul burst into the room, visibly in rage. He turned off all the screens and shouted at everyone. The room quickly emptied, but I remained seated. "Why aren't you gone?" Paul demanded. "I was paid to stay in the room until 2 o'clock, I replied. "Mr. Tinker is the one who hired me." "Who the hell is Mr. Tinker?" Paul snapped. "He's the other person involved with Julia. A copy of the DVD has been sent to her husband and to the FBI. I'm just here as a witness to whatever you do or say." Paul's face grew red with fury, and he rushed out of the room, vowing to return with more money. Paul then entered, identified himself as an FBI agent, and I handed over the DVD. The agent left, and shortly after, Paul returned with cash to try to bribe me to leave. I refused and stayed until the FBI handled everything. The afternoon ceremony honoring Paul was canceled. Julia was interviewed by local police and the FBI. On Saturday, Paul was arrested, and the news broke on local TV. The story about the lawyer facing charges for blackmail spread quickly. Channel 7 reported the name of the law firm where he had worked. Later, I learned that Mrs. Tinker sued her husband for divorce, and she made it clear that if he contested anything, the DVD would be made public. As a result, He lost his family, his home, and 75% of his business. If his business failed to make at least $20,000 a month, he was responsible for covering the difference. While Julia, Moran, and I watched the destruction of the two men's lives on TV, I treated the two women as victims. Julia believed I thought Carl had blackmailed her. However, the private investigator revealed that on the night Julia claimed Carl drugged her and took pictures, it was actually Julia who willingly brought Carl into the back room. There were no photos. Moran had introduced Julia to Carl and had been involved with him when Julia wasn't in Salinas. Once I had the money from Carl and the court case against Paul was concluded, I set my final plan into motion. I filed for divorce and had Julia sign the necessary paperwork. One evening, after the three of us had enjoyed a bottle of wine, Julia signed and Moran witnessed it. Julia received $1,000 when the divorce was finalized, and she got to keep her car. On the day the divorce was finalized, I took both women to Los Angeles for a day out. We walked around Venice Beach, enjoyed the scenery, and I bought them both light summer dresses. Afterward, we had a light lunch with wine, and I encouraged them to get tattoos, something small and discreet. We went to a tattoo shop where they picked designs. I made arrangements with the tattoo artist to include a subtle word in their designs. Both women had their tattoos done at the same time. They were side by side, holding hands as the process took place. Once the tattoos were done, the technician bandaged them up for the trip home. Back in town, I drove them to a duplex and explained that their rent had already been paid for the next 2 months. "You're no longer my wife," I said, handing Julia an envelope with the $1,000 she was entitled to from the divorce, along with a copy of the final decree and the keys to her new home. "We're done," I continued. "You lied to me about Carl. He wasn't blackmailing you. Moran, you lied to me as well. You introduced Carl to Julia. You both have to live with your choices." They argued, but I backed out of the driveway and left. I'm sure they got even madder when they changed the bandages on their backs and saw that both had been marked with a design with a word 304 in the middle. Retribution and deserved punishment for their actions. Story 2. Let me introduce you to Gary. Back in high school, we were inseparable. The four of us. Edward, Drake, Tim, and me. Which wasn't an option for everyone. So Tim enlisted in the Army, while the rest of us pursued various colleges and universities. After Tim's service ended, he returned to our hometown, just like the rest of us did for our 10-year high school reunion. We reconnected and realized that though life had taken us in different directions, our bond remained unbroken. Drake, who had studied clinical laboratory sciences, became the head of the local hospital's lab services. Edward, with his degree in police sciences, started his own private investigation firm. Tim, who had worked on tank maintenance in the Army, went on to establish a successful heavy machinery service in our city. As for me, I earned a degree in engineering and became the sales manager for a mid-sized machine tooling firm. We were true friends in high school, and even after 10 years, we remained as close as ever. This isn't just a phrase. I can prove it with my story. Tim and Drake still live with their first wives and children. Edward and I are both living with our second wives. Edward has 2 kids from his first marriage and 2 from his second. I don't have any children from my first marriage, but I am now a proud father of 2. We get together 5 to 6 times a year for poker, alternating at each other's houses. On top of that, we gather quarterly at a restaurant or bar on Friday nights, so that our wives can take us home, giving everyone peace of mind. They could check on us, and no one is obligated to drink anything alcoholic, since there's always a designated driver. A few months ago, a new hotel opened in our city, and we decided to check out the new hotel bar during our regular Friday night gathering. I am Gary Brown. I was born in this city and came back here with my college girlfriend, Kathy, who became my first wife. I dated several girls in college, but eventually I chose Kathy. Kathy was a blonde girl with green eyes. We had both been through breakups and were helping each other heal, which led to us starting a relationship. Kathy was from my hometown, and that was one more reason we wanted to build our futures together. I studied engineering while Kathy majored in business administration. We graduated at the same time and returned to our hometown together. I got a job at a machine tool firm where my boss quickly recognized my talent for sales. I began traveling to neighboring states and even Canada to sell our products, and I became quite successful. Kathy worked for a commercial agricultural firm where she enjoyed her work. We earned enough to live comfortably, and we lived in an apartment while saving up for a nice house. Kathy used to laugh at me because I preferred low-fat milk over alcoholic drinks when I was home. I was happy that I didn't have to pretend to enjoy alcohol. Eventually, I asked her to be my wife, giving her a nice ring, and she said yes. Our family started planning the wedding, and we had a big celebration with our parents, relatives, and friends. After the wedding, we went on a honeymoon to BG. We purchased a nice house, and the mortgage was manageable. Life was good. We went skiing in the winter and traveled in the summer, both in the States and abroad. We had been married for over 6 years when I asked her, "When are we going to have kids?" She was proud of her body and told me that a baby would spoil it. She didn't want children. We argued about it, but I couldn't convince her to change her mind. She told me that the grandchildren our parents hoped for would come from my sister, who had children, and also from her brother, who lived in Sacramento, California, and had kids. So according to Kathy, there was no need for us to have children. After more discussions, we remained childless. I bought an expensive Harley-Davidson, and we began taking long trips on the bike. However, Kathy soon began complaining about the bike rides, saying that we were getting older and that traveling on the bike wasn't as comfortable anymore. So the long trips came to an end. Apart from the issue of children, I was content with my wife, Kathy, at that time. Our relationship was, in my view, fairly average. Kathy and I weren't very adventurous, and since we didn't have children, we spent more time together. We had a regular routine, with some exceptions due to my business travels and Kathy's commitments. Looking back, I would advise men who want an average marriage to avoid women who don't like children, but at the time, I was unaware of the long-term consequences. I was happy, though my only regret was not having kids. Now, to continue with my story, my 4 friends and I were at the bar of the newest hotel in our city. 2 men sat down at a table near us. Edward glanced at them and quietly asked me, "Gary, doesn't that man look familiar to you?" I looked over and recognized him immediately. "Dan, you're right. That's Charles Miller, one of my ex-wife's former partners," I replied. The others at the table turned their heads to listen, recalling the story of my first wife. Drake, after hearing Edward and me, asked, "What do you think about him?" I thought for a moment, and a plan quickly formed in my mind. My friends waited as I broke the silence and asked, "Could you help me with something?" "Don't worry, I don't want any violence. I just want an honest conversation." Tim, who had a background in the military, organized the plan. Edward and I would head to the restroom, and when we came back, Drake would start walking and we would surround Charles. The 4 of us would approach him and speak to him openly. Everyone agreed, and the plan went into action. We surrounded Charles and his companion. I calmly told them, "I don't want any violence, just an honest exchange of information." Charles, looking confused, asked, "Do I know you?" I responded, "I'm Gary Brown." He looked at me, his face tense, so I reminded him, "My ex-wife's name is Kathy Brown." He relaxed a bit, now recalling who I was. However, fear soon took over as he realized who I was. My friend stood close, and I reassured him. "We're in a hotel with security cameras, staff around us, and witnesses. I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just want to have an honest talk." Charles understood my intent and told him, "Mr. Miller, I think you should listen to him. This bar is full of people." Tim also confirmed, "Our friend just wants a simple discussion, no more." With that, the tension lowered and Charles seemed to calm down. Now, it was time to hear Charles' version of the story. As you may know, men who are attracted to women often fall into one of two categories: the Casanova type and the Don Juan type. The Casanova type tends to have women pursue them, while the Don Juan type actively works to conquer the woman. These two types can achieve success with different kinds of women. I straddle the middle of the two types, so my successes in the hunt were hit or miss. My name is Charles Miller, and I was raised in a divorce family. I knew my father was a philanderer, and my mom divorced him because of this. My younger brother and I lived with my mom. My father has been divorced 3 times and now lives with a girlfriend, though they are not married. What is interesting is that he became faithful to her without a marriage certificate. My mom met a good man, also divorced like her, and they married. My younger brother became an average guy, and our stepfather's role model influenced him. So he became a simple dad with 3 kids. I like my 2 nieces and my nephew. I took after my father, but my ladies' man lifestyle only started after I graduated with a degree in business administration. During college, I was an average student with girlfriends. I went through disappointments, but also caused heartache for one of my girlfriends, so I think I was totally average. I didn't find a constant girlfriend until it was time to graduate. During college, one of my girlfriends cheated on me, and later I had a fling with someone else when I was in a serious relationship with another girl. My father's philandering ways came back to haunt me. This girl was my last serious girlfriend in college, and we began planning our life together when she caught me in bed with another girl. She left me on the spot, and I started my graduate life alone. I discovered that I attracted older women, older meaning up to 20 years my senior at the age of 23. The first time I noticed this was at my job, though I didn't start any romantic relationships at the company. My success began in my home building. Yes, I know home building sounds like an odd term, but I can't explain it any other way. In this city there were 2 malls. White Oaks Mall wasn't just a mall. One side of it was built as an apartment building. One of the 2 gates to this building opened into the mall, and the parking lot was shared with the mall. The only difference was that our parking lot was a bit separated from the mall's. I arrived here in the Midwest from New England, and living in this building was a good bargain. The apartment on the 4th floor had a great view of the city, as the largest building with twin towers was clearly visible from my window with distant hills beyond. When I was bored at home, I would walk down to the shopping mall, which was full of people, restaurants, coffee bars, and shops. It is often said that supermarkets were invented by men, while shopping malls were invented by women. Men tend to prefer buying everything quickly in one place, while women enjoy strolling, looking at shop windows, and taking their time. This mall was filled with women, and I walked among them. Over time, my home became a place where I met people, and I tried to be polite, humorous, and approachable. I chose to meet women who matched my preferences, whether younger or older, and many of my interactions were with women who were older than I was. I learned to manage relationships carefully and kept things respectful. After parting ways with a woman named Wendy, I was happy to see that she was doing well in her life. Despite the challenges she faced, she remained positive and resilient. I took this experience as a lesson in handling relationships with more care and respect, ensuring that I maintained good health and safety. I became more cautious about personal interactions, taking precautions to protect my health and well-being while engaging with others. I was her 3rd lover, and she had been cheating on her husband for a year. I realized why I had such quick success. She was already a serial cheater before she met me. Her justification was that her husband traveled a lot for work, and she felt lonely. At the time, I didn't mind it. I was only focused on her and didn't worry about her seeing other men. I admitted I was a player and collected videos of my conquests. I wanted to brag about my experiences anonymously, so I edited and published some of my videos on an amateur website. About 6 months after our breakup, I learned that someone had recognized her and told her husband. I made sure to edit my face out of the videos, but I was still tracked down. After that, I stopped uploading my videos. One evening, My business partner was staying at the newest hotel in town, and I invited him for a casual meeting at the bar. We were sitting there when 4 people surrounded us. One of them introduced himself as Gary Brown, and when I heard his name, I immediately recognized him as her ex-husband. I felt a moment of fear because I didn't know how he would react. However, Gary was calm and said he just wanted an honest conversation. He asked about my affair with his ex-wife, and I answered all of his questions. He asked if I was her first lover, and I explained that I was only her third. He told me that despite everything, he didn't harbor any hatred toward me, and even mentioned that she had been unfaithful before meeting me. Then Gary began to tell a story from years ago during a gathering with friends. We were discussing various topics when one of our friends, Edward, showed a video of Kathy with another man. It was a shocking revelation for Gary, and he seemed deeply affected. I could tell it was difficult for him, and I suggested that he not follow through with a divorce, as the situation was already tough for everyone involved. Edward said, "Naturally, Gary has to divorce this 304, but he needn't follow me. Our state's family law doesn't have fault-based divorce, so the spouses must split all assets 50% to 50%, except for prenuptial agreements or property acquired before marriage. Screw our state's family law. I have common children with Eve, and am not happy about the 50% to 50% asset split plus 5 years of alimony, etc., but I know my kids will get something from our shared assets." Poor Gary, however, doesn't have any common children with this cheating woman. Why should he share 50% of their assets with his cheating 304? I was sad and silent, lost in my own thoughts. So Tim continued the conversation with Edward and asked, "What did you think of to help Gary, Edward?" Edward responded, "I worked together with lawyers on many divorces originating from our investigations, so not only talking about my own experience with divorce, I think we could help Gary reach a 70 to 30% or even 75 to 25% split in his divorce." After him, Drake added, "What ideas do you have that wouldn't be too much of a burden for Gary? Living together with his cheating wife for 6 or 8 more months," Edward began, "is very difficult. When I discovered she cheated on me, I was caught between hatred and depression. You heard the details from me hundreds of times. We were silent and waited for him to continue his confession. I hated women for months. I did not trust any woman at all. How Maria and I are going to move in together next month, I think, is a little miracle. But I am thinking that if Gary took on an actor's role for a little financial revenge, he would come out of the divorce emotionally better than I did. The fiscally saving revenge campaign could decrease his depression and serve as a good cover to hide his true emotions from his cheating 304. His depression will be less after the divorce, and he could start his life over with less burden after a more successful revenge than I had. He would have more secret money to start his future." Even after her video performance, I began to smile a little because I thought of my luck. Had Maria and Edward lived together, Edward would not have looked for such videos on the net. I don't know if it was this small smile or my hazy thoughts that made me accept Edward's revenge idea to play this actor role for a few months, but I decided to go for it. If you assist me, I can postpone my divorce for months to achieve this revenge. I'll try this actor role if I deem Kathy to be a free-of-charge escort girl. Then I can do it." Edward said, "Boys, I want to do some brainstorming. I'm very curious about what ideas we could come up with together to change the 50 to 50% rate to a better one in just 6 or 9 months." This was the best thing because Edward's words opened the gateway to successful brainstorming. There were some extreme ideas, but Edward's experiences served as a good filter to quickly discard the wrong ones. The successful ideas we found and accomplished were as follows. First, Drake's idea was to compress the poker opportunity so I could lose more money, and my friends could hold it aside from me. Second, Edward suggested I discover horse racing, and my friends could also gather the lost money from there. Yes, kind reader, you were right. These activities could have hidden 10% of our fortune after 5 to 6 years. However, this money was the liquid cash capital for major operations. Third, Edward knew a Harley-Davidson used motorcycle trade-in with service. The owner had gone through a sad divorce with an unfaithful wife, and he had a special practice where he buys used bikes and maintains them for up to 2 years. The original, now divorced owner could buy back his old bike. This is a good bargain. This bike money was hidden through gambling and horse racing, as well as by the divorced lawyer. By the way, my wife did not like my Harley at all. Fourth, Tim explained that the value of new cars decreases by 30% within some months from the purchase date. We had bought my wife's new car last year, and we planned to buy me a new car 2 years later. I would bring forward the purchase. During the car purchase, I could drain the shared bank balance better, and a small bank loan would reduce our fortune. Fifth, the boss weapon was next. Drake gave us this example. His colleague was going through a divorce, so he had asked the hospital's financial leader to postpone the payment of his bonus until after his divorce. I asked my boss to postpone any payments of my bonus and also any salary increases until after my divorce. Sixth, the personal belongings modernization was Edward's newer idea. I had to change many personal items from my electric shaver to my shirts, which were getting old. And then the best idea came from Tim, the thick pencil idea. He knew a construction firm owner who had gone through a difficult divorce and once heard a hint about a smart trick to amend the 50% to 50% rate of divorce. We had bought an older house that needed renovation. Since we purchased it, this construction firm owner offered twice the price for the smaller renovations, and I had to pay his tax and interest, but he gave it back in cash later. He told me he only helped me because his first wife had also been unfaithful. This was a little dangerous trick with the IRS. Edward's next idea was that I could take out a bank loan or some smaller bank loans to decrease the common assets. Edward's firm worked with a bank manager who had divorced an unfaithful wife. After Edward's firm found the evidence, he knew he could help me with smaller bank loans for purchasing my car and the house renovations. We would collectively repay the bank loans during the divorce. However, I had secret cash through the above-mentioned ways. The clueless Kathy didn't suspect anything. I think she was glad I went to the horse races. She got more free time to do what she wanted. The house renovations and my new car needed a longer waiting time, but I managed both very well. I sold my Harley, and she joyfully agreed to buy both my new car and house renovations. We got 2 smaller bank loans, so I knew I would reach a better rate than 50 to 50% as Edward had forecasted. My rate was about 75% 2 months before my planned divorce. Edward and I wanted to find a video lover. I wanted to confront him using a baseball bat. I didn't want to hurt him seriously, but a little rough treatment. That's all. So we found the apartment building at White Oaks by observing the twin towers of the biggest Roman Catholic church, with a hill in the background from the window in my wife's video. The twin church towers and the hills helped us. Edward asked his employee to walk up and down in the mall, and we narrowed the candidates to one guy who lived on the highest level. We had Charles Miller's name, photos, and video about him. However, Edward checked on Kathy during the Miller project, and Charles was a lucky man because Edward's other employee found enough evidence of another lover with brand new videos and photos. Edward persuaded me that Kathy was not just a cheater, but a serial cheater. She was not worth it to injure Charles seriously or go to prison for her. I gave up my cruel revenge on Charles. The newly found evidence of Kathy's infidelity had the side effect that I did not need to use Charles' video in the divorce confrontation with Kathy. Instead, I could present Edward's latest evidence, and that is what persuaded me to start the divorce. Her latest lover was a young bachelor, similar to Charles, and his name was Kevin Wilson. The frequency of our intimacy decreased to 0. My acting was not 100%, but 90% was good enough, because Kathy was clueless about my friend's financial campaign. She contributed to buying my new car and the house renovations along with covering the losses from poker games and horse racing. Selling the Harley was a pleasure for her. Now, I can understand what it's like for secret agents and how much work it is to pretend. I played this role for 8 months, and I estimated I reached a 75 to 25% split of our shared assets in the divorce. My friends were fantastic helpers, mainly because they had to keep my project secret from their wives and Edward's girlfriend. Edward was right. Our successful financial adjustments and the 8 months of playing the clueless, dumb husband put me in a better emotional state than Edward was after his divorce. My level of hatred didn't decrease, but I was sure I would be ready for new relationships with women faster than Edward was. We met Maria a year after his sad divorce, and they lived apart for another year before he was ready to move in together. I went to the best divorce lawyer in the city, whom Edward had recommended to me. I began by opening a new bank account and taking other actions. I found an apartment which Tim paid for with my secret money for 6 months, so everything was kept secret from my wife. When my divorce documents were ready, the process server delivered them to her. On Friday, I lied to her, telling her that I had to travel to a nearby city, but I really took a day off from work on Thursday. I did not plan a dramatic last scene because I was afraid of letting her know that I knew she had more lovers than just Brian Wheeler. I did not want to risk exposing my secret money stash. I hated her, but I was relieved that I could get away from her without a final goodbye. The 8 months of pretending to be the dumb husband drained any remaining interest I had in her emotional state. But I knew I should give her some explanation as to why I wanted a divorce. So I sat down and wrote a short letter. Dear soon-to-be ex-wife Kathy, I wanted to leave you without saying goodbye, but our shared life deserves a letter. My friend Edward is a PI, and he gave me enough evidence of your affair with Kevin Wilson. I spared some of the lying for you, stating that it wasn't just a fling. I don't think your extramarital affair happened due to any extortion or abuse. This was your decision. You thought you could have it both ways. I am your faithful husband, but I'm not interested in watching my wife with other men, nor in that lifestyle. The foundation of a modern marriage is a high degree of respect for each other. After your betrayal, I am free to forget my vows of faithfulness. However, I believe a non-declared open marriage would be an emotional shock for you too if you discovered I had extramarital activities. A declared open marriage wouldn't have worked for us because in most cases, open marriages lead to divorce. After thinking about all the possibilities, I want a quick and quiet divorce. You don't want any children, so we are fortunate in that regard. The divorce could be finalized very quickly. My lawyer told me that we could be free after 3 months if you do not contest or oppose the divorce. Marriage counseling is a waste of time and money. I suggest you look for a lawyer. I intend to divorce you, and please do not call me. We can talk through our lawyers. Yours soon-to-be ex-husband. I cleaned the biggest table in the living room and placed my letter and my ring on it. I looked at the newly renovated house and then drove to my new apartment, my new home. The next day, the process server delivered the divorce documents to her workplace. Kathy called me on my mobile several times, but I declined all of her calls. Soon, I received information from my lawyer that her lawyer had contacted him. During the trial, she and her lawyer accepted almost all of my conditions, so she did not resist the divorce. However, she did have one condition, a half-hour face-to-face conversation. I agreed, and she came with her lawyer to my lawyer's office, where we could talk for half an hour. We got an empty conference room and sat face-to-face. She wore a very nice dress, but looked a little broken and sad. She started after greeting me. I accept all your conditions. I won't fight for our marriage. I think you're happy about that. I appreciate that you didn't try to delay our divorce or make it difficult. She replied, I thought about your friend Edward, the PI, and I realized I was under surveillance. Please believe me, Brian was my only lover, and I was faithful to you before him. This was a huge lie, but I thought about my better share, 75% to 25%. Rather than 50% to 50%, and I decided not to mention anything about Charles. If I did, she or her lawyer would have looked into it, and I would have risked exposing my hidden money. Instead of confronting her with the facts, I said, "Kathy, I had a suspicion, so I asked Edward to conduct a secret investigation. We found out about you and your lover, Brian Wheeler. After that, I went to a lawyer and began divorce proceedings. I didn't want a big dramatic scene, so I just left my letter on the table." When the divorce documents were ready, she started crying. She said, "Do you know what a shock it was to find your letter on the table when I came home that you had left me? I was alone and your letter was so cold, so emotionless." She cried for several minutes. I felt relieved and didn't disturb her because as she cried, she used up the time from our half-hour conversation. Once she stopped crying, she continued, "Believe me, I love you and I always will. I remember my husband, and this was a mistake with Brian. He's younger than me and he pushed me into this affair. I was in a weak state and couldn't resist. I was happy with you." It seemed like she wanted me to reconsider, but I closed that door by saying, "Kathy, I don't want reconciliation. You should give up any hope of that now and forever." She understood, wiped her eyes and said, "Gary, I know our marriage is over, but I'd like us to be able to reach a point where if we meet, you won't turn around and walk in the opposite direction. I'd like it if we could greet each other if we ran into each other in the city." I replied, "Kathy, I promise I'll greet you, but I won't talk beyond small talk like the weather. You can't expect more from me." Kathy agreed. "Thank you. That's enough for me." In the remaining time, we discussed the exact details of selling the house and other financial matters. The two lawyers attested to the judge that we had talked for half an hour, so the divorce was finalized after 3 months. When we sold the house, the renovations had increased its value, so the cost of the renovations wasn't wasted. I bought a condo, and Kathy also bought a condo for herself. When we met in the city, we would greet each other, but we never spoke beyond that. I kept my promise for a quick divorce, and I always kept my word. I believe a true friend doesn't betray you with your spouse, and my friends were true friends. They helped me during the hardest time of my life, so they were not fair-weather friends. Fair-weather friends only stay with you during good times, but disappear when things get difficult. They also kept my savings action secret from their families. To this day, I am very grateful for their help, mainly to Edward, who discovered Charles Boswell's video in time. I am forever indebted to him. It is my deep conviction that a cheating spouse is a thief of more than just vows or affection. A cheater is a thief of time. The cheating spouse steals that time from the innocent spouse, time that could be used to find a better partner. If the cheating is uncovered in time, the innocent spouse gets more time to find a brighter future after the divorce. I got the information about Kathy's infidelity in time, so she did not steal much of my time. It may be that the innocent spouse could stop the other spouse from cheating with reconciliation if it's not already too late. Unfortunately, it usually is too late in most cases. However, we didn't have any children, so I did not hesitate to divorce quickly, except for my 8 months of personal reflection and preparation. Edward married his second wife 6 months after my divorce. It was not surprising that I was his best man at their wedding, and I wasn't alone at their wedding. I met Emily almost 6 months after my divorce. Edward was right. I recovered from my lack of trust in women more quickly than he did. It was very interesting because we met online. The modern world offers new possibilities, and I was exploring these by using dating websites. The high divorce rate and my own experiences convinced me that online dating could offer the same possibilities for successful relationships as traditional dating. I looked through many profiles and found some from North America. I searched for women from around the world, but I was particularly interested in one ad. The woman described that she was looking for a partner who would like to have children with her. Kathy had never wanted children, so this ad stood out to me. The photo showed a pretty 32-year-old woman, and her ad was rare. Most women described their hobbies and what they were looking for in a partner, someone understanding and affectionate, etc. I was tired of reading those kinds of ads, but this particular one piqued my interest. I learned she lived in a neighboring state and decided to respond. I sent my photo and details, explaining that I had divorced a woman who didn't want children at all. Everything she had hidden from me for years. We argued about having kids several times because I wanted them, but my ex-wife was adamant. I now know this made her suggest we meet in a city halfway between our cities. She proposed a hotel restaurant for lunch at 1 p.m. I arrived an hour early after a 2-hour drive, found the hotel, and sat in the lobby to wait. We both had the other's photo on our smartphones. We met earlier than expected because she also arrived early. She was a medium-height, brown-haired, blue-eyed woman with wide cheekbones. Her hair was not long, and she wore a nice dress with a light blue spring coat, which looked lovely on her. We greeted each other and went to lunch. She introduced herself as Emily Crane. She was a career-driven woman, a lawyer, but felt she had reached the maximum in her job because the law firm she worked for no longer offered any opportunities for advancement. She was straight and had boyfriends in the past, but when she tried for a permanent partner, the most recent one left her. I told her my ex-wife didn't want children and cheated on me. She mentioned that she also had a boyfriend who had been unfaithful. She shared that she had other dating ads on different websites, but this was the only one where she expressed her desire for children. The other websites brought candidates who were not suitable for long-term partnerships or future family life. She felt that she had a narrowing window of time to start a family. We sympathized with each other and arranged to meet in her city the following week. We took things slowly at first. Soon, it was time to meet in my city. We connected well and found that we were compatible with each other. We decided not to waste time and planned to get married soon. Edward was my best man at the wedding, and he gave me a knowing smile because his second wife was expecting their third child. He joked that we would be next. We went to Florida for our honeymoon. When we returned, Emily quit her job. I sold my condo and she sold hers, and together we purchased a nice house. She had a healthy bank balance, and I was able to use part of my savings. The new marriage helped protect our financial strategy from Kathy, who would never suspect our money management plan. However, I kept the secret about my savings from Emily. The main reason was the security it gave me. My Harley was parked in the garage, but we hadn't used it much since Emily became pregnant. We had 2 children, a daughter, Nancy, and a son, Ted. Edward and Maria also had 2 children. Drake organized a secret DNA test for both Edward and me, and the results confirmed our parentage, which was a relief. I am very proud of my kids, and I believe my marriage with Emily is a success. She now works at a local law office. You might be curious about what happened to Kathy. I learned about her from mutual acquaintances, and it was interesting because I knew more about her than the local media did. After our divorce, she had a tubal ligation, effectively ending any possibility of having children. She was alone for a short time, but then she dated more men. 2 years after our divorce, she started a relationship with a bisexual divorced man who eventually asked her to marry him. She had been living an open marriage lifestyle with his ex-wife, but she left him for another man to start a family. I wasn't aware that my ex-wife had a particular interest in making personal videos, but I always suspected that she was more likely to cheat secretly than to openly pursue unconventional relationships. Eventually, Kathy's new partner, a drug dealer, became involved in a violent situation with his business associates. After a financial dispute, the partners killed both Kathy's new boyfriend and her husband with gunshots. Kathy was injured but survived after a long surgery at the local hospital. The police were quick to pursue the gang, and after a gunfight, 2 suspects were arrested, one of whom did not survive. This type of criminal activity was rare in our city, with the last similar incident happening 20 years ago. The media focused on this case, and Kathy's lifestyle became a topic of gossip once again. Kathy's father passed away before her second marriage, and her mother suffered a mild stroke during the trial. Kathy lived alone after the events because no one wanted to marry her. However, after 2 years, she gained some respect for caring for her mother. She told people that although her brother suggested putting their mother in an elder care facility, she wanted to show that she had emotions and wasn't just the image portrayed in the media. Looking back to when we met Charles Miller and his business partner, I felt fortunate that Charles was a little boastful about his relationships, which led my friend to find his compromising videos. This allowed me to deal with the situation with my ex-wife and move on in time. I found a better woman, and I am a proud father of 2 kids. Kathy never wanted children, and now she could no longer have any. I thought of a way to express my gratitude for the turn of events that had led me to a happier life. If my friend hadn't found the video that revealed my ex-wife's betrayal, I would have discovered Kathy's unfaithfulness much later, and I wouldn't have married Emily or had my 2 wonderful children. I surprised Charles when I extended my hand to him, saying, "I'd like to thank you for sharing the video of my ex-wife. I'm a happier man now than I was 7 years ago." Charles stood up, and we shook hands. I honestly meant it when I thanked you. Your video was the key to understanding my ex-wife's true character, and it gave me the chance to move on and find a better partner. Now I'm the proud father of 2 children. After a brief pause, one of his friends spoke up. After a tough divorce, I lived alone for 2 years, so naturally I spent time online. I came across a collection of videos about cheating spouses and women who had been unfaithful. When I saw your ex-wife's face, Kathy, I couldn't resist showing Gary the video at our next gathering. Gary interrupted. "I was furious at her, and at you too," he said. The friend continued, "I'm a private investigator, and I helped Gary track down his wife's lover. This surveillance led us to her apartment. Gary was organizing a confrontation, but I convinced him not to risk prison over her." Gary laughed, saying, "At that point, I didn't care about her anymore. I was relieved to be rid of her before things escalated any further. I didn't want to waste more time with her, and I'm grateful that I found my second wife and my kids before she could take any more from me." The mood lightened as Gary reassured his friend. "I'm not mad at you. I was just relieved to finally move on." I smiled, but the conversation turned awkward when Gary mentioned Kathy's involvement in a violent situation. She had barely survived a tragic event involving her new partner, and the media had covered it extensively. The story made headlines for months as details of her past lifestyle were brought to light. Gary then asked, "You're a bachelor, right?" I replied, "No, not anymore. I'm married, and my wife is 4 months pregnant with our first child. We've even bought a nice house." Gary nodded and offered some advice. "Drake, my friend here, runs a DNA testing lab at the local hospital. You could discreetly test your child if you wanted. We all did it, and the results confirmed our parentage." He added, "Just so you know, our state's family law says that if a child is under 4 years old and the ex-husband isn't the biological father, he doesn't have to pay child support. But I believe you're the biological father, so this may not be relevant to you." We said our goodbyes and returned to our respective tables. I felt a sense of relief, but my business partner and I quickly left the hotel bar. We went our separate ways, and I returned home. For years ago, I had found a wonderful, successful woman and left my past behind. My life had become more stable, and I was focused on my family. I stopped my previous lifestyle of casual relationships and settled into a committed marriage. We had purchased a nice house with a low mortgage, and as my wife became pregnant, we started planning for the future. 6 months after the birth of my daughter, I took a DNA sample from her, but I had it tested at a different lab in a neighboring city. The results confirmed Gary's information about family law. In our state, an ex-husband must pay child support even if the child isn't his. But in the neighboring state, an ex-husband doesn't have to pay if the child is under 4. I received the results in an envelope a few days later. I opened it and read that I am not the biological father of my baby girl. Screw our state's family law. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.